Hey, welcome back to another episode of Work Comp Talk podcast, and it's a win-win game, baby. We got Bilal Kassim joining us from Pacific Workers. If you haven't followed us on social media, make sure you do so now. Everywhere, check us out, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. You can find the podcast, or you can also find Pacific Workers, which, speaking of, did you know Pacific Workers just launched their first TikTok? Ooh, ooh, you can find us on TikTok now. I'm excited about that one. But yeah, today's topic is really cool, Bilal. I'm glad you can actually join us for this one because it's a topic that I think a lot of people can relate to. And that's the difference between personal injury and workers' compensation. What's what? And when do these two actually marry together?
Sure.
So let's talk about the difference between both.
I'll start with workers' comp. It's pretty straightforward. If you're an employee and you get hurt on the job, you're entitled to workers' comp benefits. It's pretty straightforward, right?
Pretty simple.
Then you have personal injury. Personal injury is generally you're minding your business. Someone has a duty of care and they breach that duty of care and it causes injury, meaning it's a third party. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an employer, right? It can be driving your car on the freeway and then someone can change lanes into you. A company can negligently design a product in such a way that it's unsafe. So, if you're using a lawnmower or something and it's defective and it explodes, you can sue the manufacturer for negligence. And so that's personal injury.
Okay.
There's sometimes a scenario where your work injury is actually caused by the negligence of a third party or a product. And in those cases, you have what's called a crossover case, where it's a combination of a workers' comp case and a personal injury case. And so a long time ago, workers' comp was created as a carve out to personal injury law. The idea was that if you could sue your employer every time you got hurt at work, there'd be a lot of high-risk industries that would put a lot of employers out of business, right? Construction, police officers, firefighters, welders, people who are exposed to a lot of things on the job, and it's risky, and they're more often likely to suffer injuries than someone who, like me, is behind a desk most of their day. And so it was really designed to limit damages and create this statutory scheme to make the claims process straightforward, right? You don't have jury trials and things like that. So there's this issue now. You have workers' comp and personal injury. There's certain rules that go with that. For example, you can't double dip, right? You can't go and be like, hey, Carmen, you hit me with your car. I'm going to sue you and I'm going to go get workers' comp benefits for the same damages. There's credit issues involved, so you can't go to one and then go to the other and get the same amount. But really, they are incredibly important. How they interact is really fascinating.
Let's just say I borrow a company's car and I'm going to go run an errand or go visit a client, and I just so happen to be involved in a car accident that was not my fault. Someone rear-ended me or T-boned me. Then in that case, would that be workers' comp or personal injury?
If you're driving and you're doing something on behalf of your employer using their company car, it would be both workers' comp and personal injury. And it would be advisable, depending on the insurance on the other side for the personal injury matter, to pursue both cases. And the reason for that is there's often benefits in workers' comp that you can't get through personal injury and vice versa. Right? So in workers' comp, for example, if you're off of work due to your injury, the insurance carrier is required to pay you temporary total disability, which is a wage replacement. In personal injury, you don't get temporary disability. Hopefully you have a long-term disability plan, or you can apply for state disability insurance through EDD, but you got to find your wages on your own, right? It's a little bit different. And same thing for the medical care. In workers' comp, you have doctors there with the insurance company networks, and they'll treat you free of charge, provided your case is accepted and you have a good adjuster and your treatment gets authorized. The benefits of personal injury, though, are much different. You can actually have jury trials. You can get awarded things like pain and suffering, lost future wages, and things like that. And so what we see is workers' comp tends to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
It gets you the basic medical care. It pays your lost wages while you're recovering and going throughout the case. Personal injury is where you get your damages, right? That's where I think people mainly get what they feel like is justice out of a case. Workers' comp is not designed to make you whole and give you justice. It's just designed to kind of compensate you and get you by. So I would say pursuing both cases is essential. And in that scenario, it would be wise of you to do that.
And obviously it speaks to a lawyer or someone that actually understands, because I feel like if a person does not know that you can technically, there's two different states or two different ways you can go about it, they'll do one and not the other. And they can essentially lose out on some really important benefits.
Absolutely. And if you don't time it right, it can cause major problems.
What do you mean if you don't time it right? Like, I didn't call with 2 phones at the same time.
Exactly. No, so we'll get clients and they'll say, hey, you know, I just settled my personal injury case and I want to pursue the work comp side of things. And, you know, the settlement and the personal injury side is a credit against what you can get through workers' comp. And so the work comp carrier will say, no, sorry, you got to pay out of pocket for the care you need and the benefits and all that stuff before we'll pay a dime.
Oh, wow.
They can't automatically do that. They have to fight and, you know, go to court and get permission to do it, but it's something they can do. They get a dollar for dollar credit on some of the settlement. And so you have to be careful that if, you know, let's say they're in the midst of their workers' comp case and they're about to get surgery or they just had surgery and they're at home and they're on temporary disability, and then they go and they settle their personal injury case, that may cut off their right to benefits, medical and financial in the workers' comp.
That sucks.
Yeah, and then it leaves them in a weird predicament where they can't go see their work comp doctor anymore. They stop getting temporary disability, and now they have to scramble around to get things in place, which hopefully if they got a huge personal injury settlement, they're okay. But
it covers it, but what if it doesn't?
It might not. Or they may spend all the personal injury settlement or take years or whatever, and workers' comp's not covering until then. So it can cause complexities in the case. And there's also issues with the credit. So for example, if there's employer fault, the employer's right to credit against personal injury settlement is reduced pro rata by their percentage of fault. So if you don't have someone who's familiar with crossover cases handling both personal injury and workers' comp, you can run into a scenario where they're like, yeah, sure, you can have the credit dollar for dollar.
Yep.
But someone like myself would say, hey, you know what? The employer negligently maintained the car that you're driving when you got hit. And so that caused you to do something, and the employer should be culpable as well. Or, the employer wasn't maintaining the equipment properly or was breaching OSHA safety guidelines, something like that, you know? And we can actually negotiate down the credit that the employer's alleging. And we actually have that. We settled this multi-million-dollar personal injury case, and the defense in the comp case wants a $2.5 million credit against this person's work comp benefits. Well, we're alleging that the employer was very negligent and has at least a 40% fault in that case. And so we're hoping to reduce that credit down by, close to $1 million.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So what is a person supposed to look out for, let's just say, when, there is an injury and somewhat the employer is at fault for negligence? Like, what are some of those red flags? Because I could sit here and be like, well, how do I know if that's my employer's fault?
Well, it depends. It's case by case basis. In workers' comp, there's something called serious and willful misconduct, and that's a whole other topic. But basically, if your employer is extra stupid and really messes up and causes your injury, and not just negligent, but really negligent, right? Like, hey,
put a ladder on top of a rolling chair.
Yeah, or you said, hey, look, last time I started the car, it lit on fire, and it caused some serious problems. I don't feel comfortable driving the car. And they're like, no, get in the car. And then sure enough, right? That would be serious and willful misconduct. Okay. Your employer is actually responsible for that due to their increased liability. But that would be a situation where, let's say there was a manufacturing defect with the vehicle, you could sue the manufacturer, but it's also the employer's fault. And so when it comes time for the employer to say, hey, we want credit for what you got suing the manufacturer, their credit would be significantly reduced as a result of their fault.
Man, that's a fine line that you have to really balance, because you're saying sometimes you can go for the workers' comp side. You can go for the personal injury side, but it will shut off your workers' comp side. And you kind of have to outweigh which one's going to be more important. Should I get a settlement from PI, which potentially won't pay me my lost wages if I'm still out of work for X amount of time, and it won't cover for any medical or future medical you might need due to the injuries you have? Is it worth what you're going to get here to cover for what you need on workers' comp? Yikes.
It's a balancing act. Every single case is different, and it depends on a lot. The person's injury, whether they're going to move, whether they want to go back to work, whether they can go back to work, whether there's employer fault, how much they have on the insurance policy on the personal injury case available to them, what their needs and goals are, just medically and financially. There's a lot that we have to consider when making that decision, and how we litigate both cases simultaneously. And if we're not litigating both cases for them, if there's another firm that we're working with, it's incredibly important that we communicate with that firm in order to ensure that the client's needs are best met.
That's what I was going to go into next. And I'm glad that you touched on that subject, meaning, if there's another lawyer involved that's also helping part of this process, whether it's the personal injury side or the workers' comp, how do two attorneys work together? Is that usually a good thing? So should you just go with one attorney? Like, what's the best idea for that?
Every case is different, right? And there's some firms that, we work with, for example, that they only handle catastrophic personal injury cases. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if I referred them a smaller, fender bender or, low speed impact injury type car accident, they probably wouldn't take the case. But they're experts in catastrophic injuries. Mm-hmm. And so they would be a firm that I would want to work with if I had a comp case that was catastrophic. I would feel much more comfortable with them taking the personal injury side and working with me hand in hand to handle both cases.
Yeah.
There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of teamwork, ensuring the right medical evaluations are done, the right treatments being done, bills are being taken care of, lost wages are being paid through comp. There's so much that goes into it, and it's incredibly important that both sides work together. Otherwise, you do wind up in a scenario where, one case settles and it throws a wrench in the works in the other.
Yeah.
Or we send them to a wrong doctor and that messes up the personal injury case, or they do that in the personal injury case and it messes up the workers' comp case.
That's a fine line that you have to actually really dive into and really figure out which way you're going to go.
Yeah.
When, let's just say they do come to Pacific Workers, they hire you guys as the workers' comp attorney representing them in their case. I'm sure you guys work with significant amount of other attorneys that you guys trust. What happens when the person does their own search and just so happens to get two different people? It's not working out. Mm-hmm. Is it best to just work with one firm and then have that firm help you out with the other part of the case? Or, because if I were to jump into the situation, I would probably look for the best personal injury and the best workers' comp and try to get them to work together. But that's not always the case. Like you said,
yep.
Person A and person B could potentially hurt each other in whatever actions they take within my case. Should I just go to one and have that person go to their go-to person? Would that be something?
Case by case basis, I think, right? Okay. I've done both. I've worked with attorneys that I've never worked with before on, handling crossover cases, whether it's, personal injury and workers' comp or it's workers' comp and employment law.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's overlap there too. There really has to be a good vibe between the attorneys. They really have to be communicative and work together and understand just how important it is for the client. I think if I was an individual and I was just simply going with, law firm A and law firm B, and they were completely unrelated, I don't feel as though that would be as beneficial as working with a firm that has better relationships with other partner firms that are specialists in the area too.
That's good to know.
Which is why, we have select firms that we usually work with, and we refer cases to them that we feel are best handled by them, and they do a great job of handling the case. They're experts. They do a fantastic job. I'd put them against anyone else, but they have that communication with us. They have that relationship with us where we know how each other work and we can get the best results for the client.
Yeah, the vision is there for both sides.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. Is there anything else we need to know as far as like the difference between personal injury, workers' comp, or when these two actually marry together? I mean, you just mentioned something that I completely didn't even think about, which is, employment law. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different branch, but it does also marry into workers' comp. It could have been that you discovered that the person was being overworked, not paying enough, or not getting enough time off, or, called into work 5 hours after you just got off your shift. That's when a lot of other situations lead to workers' comp and injuries and stuff like that. What other type of law actually marries into workers' comp?
Oh, man, I've seen it all. Family law, criminal law.
Wait, what? Family law?
Everything, yeah.
How is family law involved? Like, my wife sent me to work?
If someone works for an employer, it's a family business. The owner of the business passed away, and the business passes down to the heirs and who the actual owner is and who has responsibility and, who we need to serve if they don't have insurance, things like that.
Yikes.
Even, child support becomes an issue.
Oh, yeah. See, that's a good one.
Liens for alimony, things like that. Those come up a lot. Criminal law comes up a lot, like you said, a lot of employment law comes up a lot. You oftentimes, we see this a lot. You'll have a day labor they're being taken advantage of, right?
Right.
They're paid cash under the table. They're treated like crap. It's not fair. It is the way it is, unfortunately. But, they'll file a workers' comp case for a serious injury they suffered, and the employer will turn around and say, oh, you didn't work for me. Or you were an independent contractor. Which is great for us, right? Because they're opening up a can of worms for themselves. And we do some employment law as well. And there's one case in particular, I remember the guy said, no, you're an independent contractor, not an employee. So I turned around and sued the company for wage and hour violations, for pay stub violations, missed overtime, lunch break violations, the works, right? And the gentleman I represented actually got double what he got in the workers' comp case from the employment law case that I resolved for him.
Nice.
Because the employer was trying to screw him.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a lot of avenues that dive into workers' comp. Yeah.
I think either if it's not directly related to the injury itself, it's related to some shady business that's going on, for the employer.
Do you remember that story? I don't know if you heard it in the news. It happened in the Monterey County with the brothers they had an employee who got injured, and they got a doctor outside of the whole workers' comp world. They try to make sure that employee was taken care of.
Yep.
Things hit the fan. Everything blew out of proportion. They got into some major fines.
That's another common one we see too. Employers will say, "Oh, don't report your injury.
We'll take you to this doctor.
We'll pay. We'll continue to pay you while you're recovering, and we'll pay your medical bills. And then 3 weeks later, get out of here.
You're
Who
fired.
are you?" They stop returning calls, right?
Yikes.
Stuff like that. So, but then that gets people fired up, and then when they come to us, they're like, oh, by the way, they didn't deduct stuff for Social Security, Medicare. They didn't give me paychecks. They never paid me overtime. Then I'm like, great.
Hint, employers.
Exactly.
Don't try to screw them over, because you can probably be screwed over yourself.
Yeah. So there is a lot of crossover, not just personal injury, but I'd say personal injury is probably one of the more common ones.
Right.
And there's a lot of nuance to it. For example, the statute of limitations is different for personal injury than it is for workers' comp. So you have to be aware of those deadlines as well. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into it.
It's a good thing that you can bring that up to a lawyer if you are in doubt a little bit, kind of on the fence of whether it is personal injury and workers' comp. Throw out the question out there. Consultations are free as well for workers' comp. So you can always ask the workers' comp attorney and just be like, hey, what do you think? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. I always feel like, if you just get a consultation going on, it just opens up your idea of what actions you can take.
Yeah.
Obviously, you still have to dive into cases to figure out more in-depth information, but at least you had the opportunity to kind of get the basics taken care of and then make a decision from there. Because I feel like a lot of people do miss out on the fact that, they didn't know, or they probably didn't link both of them together. And
we try and do our best to evaluate for personal injury when we get a client that comes in and we feel like there might be something else there. Oftentimes it's not raised as an issue, until later down the road. It could be too late.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What if it does get raised halfway through or almost at the end? What happens then?
Unfortunately, you can have an issue where you're barred by statute of limitations, which means you can't pursue your personal injury case, if you've got a work comp case. And same thing, if you say, hey, I'm just going to pursue the personal injury component, and you wait, you could be barred from, pursuing your workers' comp case. So it cuts both ways, but it's incredibly important if you are going to meet with attorney, again, give them more detail.
Yeah.
The more you have, the better it is for us to be able to assess whether or not there is a third-party personal injury case there that we can work on or refer you to as well.
That's good to know. Yeah. Well, if anybody needs any more information, you can always go into our blogs. We do have a ton of information in regards to, the difference between personal injury and workers' comp. You can also reach out Pacific Workers online, pacificworkers.com. You can also call them. They speak Spanish. I mean, just go with Pacific Workers. It was a pleasure having you again, Bilal, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have more topics. So we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Is there anything else you want to share?
No. Just, if you get hurt, call a lawyer ASAP. Don't wait. Especially if it's a personal injury crossover. There's a lot of workup that needs to be done. Sooner the better.